My 3 favorite ways of thinning paint, whether using an airbrush, spray gun, or brushes and rollers. Stay tuned. Thinning paints to paint a mural. I've gotten requests from some of my followers about how to thin your paint if you're painting a mural. So I'm painting a mural right now, as you can see, and if you're using house paint, you generally won't have to thin it, especially when you're doing a background if you're using a brush or roller. But you're going to find when you're painting smaller details, you are going to need to thin it because it's not going to flow properly. And I'm going to give you 3 ways to thin the paint, starting from my least favorite to my favorite. They will all work. Okay, so first thing about paint, I prefer to use Nova Color. It's a heavy body artist acrylic. I'm not sponsored by them, but it's really great. But it's similar to Golden or Liquitex, where it's just pure paint and binder. The color is really good. You can use house paint as well. I also use that. I usually try to use an exterior paint to save from buying different sets. But what you're going to find is when let's say you want to get, when you want to get small details, which I'm going to be doing later on this one, it's going to be too thick to flow off the brush. So the first method is water. So yes, water will work. You don't want to use too much water. And the reason is because it's going to weaken the binder. What that means is the paint, the pigment, and binder. In this case, it's acrylic, but even house paint, I know it says latex, but really it's pretty much all acrylic. Oil is a different paint altogether. I don't really use oil. That's going to be a different method. So this applies to water-based paints. So while you can use water, try not to use too much because it weakens a binder, meaning the paint is not going to be as strong. It does work, and if it's an indoor application, it's generally going to be fine. But if it's outside, you don't want to use too much water because it's not as strong. Okay, so that's my least favorite, but it will still work. Another tip, if you're using water, tap water is fine, but if you are going to be mixing that paint and then storing it for later, use distilled water. And Nova will tell you right on their website. The reason for using distilled water is because if you end up, let's say I mix a thin yellow in this case, and then, okay, I don't use it all, I'm gonna pour it back. If you use tap water, it can get mold. It doesn't always happen, but it only needs to happen to you once, and you'll know because it'll smell. It's gonna smell really bad. This paint is fine. You can see it here. It's very vibrant yellow. So that's why you use distilled water. If you're just mixing a bit and you're working on a job, you're going to be painting it, and you know you're going to use the amount, which is usually what I do, you're fine with the normal water. Side note, coffee cups, I reuse them all the time. And another side note, McDonald's coffee is much better than Tim Hortons, at least in Canada. If you're in the States, the McDonald's coffee is not the same, so it's not very good, last I checked. But the McDonald's coffee is really good. I'm not sponsored by them either, but it's really good coffee. And you could reuse the cups. I will use the cups and it'll last for a few days once it's mixed. And another note, have a water mister. This is the mister. So it's just giving a bit, and you can spray a mist in there just to keep the paint from drying up. Another tip, often I will keep a mister, a fine mister, if I'm brushing the background. Sometimes different paints are thicker than others, and even humidity levels, it can gum up a little bit. So if you just mist a little bit of water as you're painting, it's just going to help it flow better. So that's the first method, is water. Okay. The second method, okay, is, yes, alcohol. So this is just isopropyl 50%, rubbing alcohol. You get it really cheap. You can get it at the dollar store. It's going to work like water. The reason why I like it better is because it's going to, once it evaporates, you're leaving the paint behind, and it does evaporate faster than water, and it won't weaken the binder as much. So you can use just a little bit. You get it to the consistency you're going to like for flowing. Make the paint as thin as you need to brush without making it too thin that it's going to run. And that's just a personal preference. So right now I've been talking about brushing. Now, the same will work when you're spraying. Okay, so now this is just as an HVLP, high volume, low pressure gun. And yes, you can use a heavy body acrylic paint or house paint will flow through your paint gun, and yes, even your airbrush. Okay, so you're gonna have to thin it a lot more, about the consistency of milk to spray. Another tip when you're spraying, you probably want to, especially if you're using a house paint, because the quality is not usually as good, if you can strain it, so you're gonna mix it, you can mix it in your cup or whatever. I'm gonna tell you the third method after. You can use a bit of water, or even better, the alcohol. Mix it to consistency, put a strainer on, and then pour it, and it will spray through your gun beautifully, and even an airbrush. Okay, this airbrush is a Badger Anthem 155, and I love this airbrush. I'm not sponsored by them either, but it's a great company. And because a nozzle is not too fine, you don't want too fine of a nozzle in the airbrush, like the ones with the suction, the cups, like the Iwatas have a lot of them. Those are awesome airbrushes, but they're made for detail, and you don't really want to be using a thicker paint to flow through your airbrush, because the nozzle's finer and it's not made fine. It does work, but it'll clog a lot easier. So if you strain your paint, I do it all the time, you can indeed airbrush with a thicker paint, as long as it's thinned down to the consistency of about milk. That would be too thin if you're painting a wall like this, unless you're looking for a watercolor effect, but it may drip. So you don't want it that thin. If you're spraying, airbrushing, spray guns, always wear your mask. It doesn't matter whether you're thinning with water, alcohol, anything, always wear a mask. It does get into your lungs, and it's never good. Now, the third and my best method for thinning paint is with, now this is a paint conditioner. This one is Zinsser Extender. Also, Floetrol, made by the Flood Company, is also excellent. I find the Zinsser is a little bit thinner. They both are really great. It's a paint conditioner. It just extends the open time of the paint. It thins it without weakening the binder. So this is better than water, because water will weaken the binder. So, and it's actually good. I recommend using a bit of Floetrol to, even if you're just painting a wall, just a little bit, depending on different paints are all have a different consistency. It's just going to help you get a smoother effect. You could even put it through your mister if you're finding your paint is really thick. Benjamin Moore paints tend to be thicker, so that will help you a lot. So those are my three methods for thinning paint. If you have a favorite method, let me know. Those ones have worked best. So water does definitely work. Just don't overwater it, because you're going to weaken the binder. Alcohol also works probably better. One thing is, you're going to find, even with water, as the water evaporates in your paint cup, you may need to add more, because it's evaporating, the paint will get thinner. That's not a big deal. That's where the mister comes in handy. Just spray a bit. Alcohol will thin even faster, and even with Floetrol, it will eventually, maybe every 10-15 minutes, you might need to just add a little bit. And that's another reason why water is not the best, because you're adding more and you're weakening it. But those are all methods I've used for many years. They work excellent. The Floetrol or Zinsser paint extender is excellent. It's a really great product. And it also helps, you can get more transparent effects by mixing that to your paint without making the paint too weak, that it's not having the longevity of the paint on its own. So let me know what your favorite methods are. I hope this helped you, and I'm going to continue painting this mural here, and I will be thinning it when I'm doing some outlines. This is a cartoon mural. I'm going to definitely need to thin, and that's how I'll get nice fine lines. For painting lines, another side tip, a lot of people like Posca markers for painting outlines. Personally, I don't. Now the reason is, I know they say they're permanent, but they're not. I've tested it many times. I will let it cure, I paint it, and then if you wet it on the wall, it's gonna smudge. Now, that's no good. A mural is supposed to be pretty durable, and when using good quality paints, it's gonna be durable. Water's not gonna harm it. Acrylic paint dries like plastic. Even a cheap paint, which I don't recommend using, but a cheap acrylic paint, once it dries, it's going to be pretty durable. The color may not have last as long because it's cheaper pigments and it's not going to flow as well. But once an acrylic paint is dry, it's not going to smear like a Posca will. A lot of people will recommend, okay, you got to clear coat, you got to put a clear protector on a Posca. That's defeating the purpose. So that's why I don't recommend, I don't use them. I will use a brush and brush the outlines. And if you need a straight outline, like I probably will here, if I can't freehand it, just mask it off, paint it, and then your paint is going to be just as durable as all the paint. You're not going to worry about the smear, and if your customer wants a clear coat, you can clear coat. Most of the time, a good quality paint inside, under normal circumstances, does not need a clear coat. So hopefully that helps you. Let me know what your best method is, and also if you prefer McDonald's coffee to Tim Hortons coffee. At least in Canada, the McDonald's coffee is better.